I never thought much about Tuesday nights until they became hers. It started at the corner cafe near the bus stop, the one that stayed open later than it should. I wasn't even supposed to be there most nights, but routine has a way of sneaking in. Coffee too bitter, music too soft, a clock on the wall that always ran 5 minutes slow. She was usually there first. Mid-40s, hair pinned up like she'd been too busy to care, glasses she sometimes forgot on the table. My best friend's aunt, though I hadn't made that connection until the second week. To me, at first, she was just the woman who sat 2 tables over, who always read with the book tilted toward the light instead of straight on. I'd order the same thing, black coffee, 1 sugar. She remembered before I realized it. One evening the barista was about to ask, but she looked up from her book and said, "Black. 1 sugar." I don't think I answered right away. My throat caught. I just nodded, and she went back to her page like it hadn't been anything. The attraction didn't come like a punch. More like background music getting louder when you finally noticed the song. I'd glance at her hands on the mug, pale from the steam. She had a way of curling her fingers around the cup like it was colder in there than it really was. Conversation came by accident. She sighed once at the headline of a folded newspaper. I muttered something about the weather turning, and she glanced up. "You check the weather too much for someone your age." I almost laughed, almost said something clever, but instead I just shrugged. "Gives me something to look forward to." That was it. No great spark, no movie script reply. But she smiled, not wide, not forced, just a curl at the edge of her lips that made me look down at the table, at the napkin I'd been folding into squares. Loneliness is harder to admit than anything. It wasn't loud in me. It was just small things, the way I scrolled through my phone and typed messages I never sent, or how my apartment stayed too quiet, even when I played music. She didn't know any of that. But somehow, I felt like she could guess. One Tuesday, I lingered a little longer, even though my coffee had gone cold. She closed her book, tapped it on the table once, and said, "You live nearby, don't you?" "Yeah. Across from the laundromat." "Figures. You always look like you've just folded something." Her eyes flicked toward the napkin I'd been creasing again. I felt heat climb my neck, but she didn't laugh. It became a rhythm after that. Small talk that wasn't really small. Her telling me she hated when people cut through her garden to get to the street. Me admitting I didn't know how to cook anything beyond eggs and pasta. She raised an eyebrow at that, like she wasn't sure if I was joking. I never asked why she came so often. Maybe I didn't want to know. Maybe I was afraid the answer wouldn't include me. That night, as I left, she said something different. Not casual, not in passing. Just before I stepped out, she spoke without looking up. "Stay after dark sometime." The words followed me out into the street, heavier than they should have been. I walked home with my phone in my pocket, screen lighting up against my leg with a new message. It was her name. Just 5 words, "We're still awake next door." And for the first time in months, I didn't leave the message unopened. I didn't go over that first night. I read the message 3 times, thumb hovering, screen dimming. My mind turned it into more than it was, then less, then more again. In the end, I set the phone down like it was dangerous to hold. 2 nights later, I found myself standing in front of her door anyway. Jacket in hand, excuse rehearsed. "You left this in the cafe." Though it wasn't hers, it was mine. A jacket I'd left on purpose, like some weak tether pulling me back. She opened the door in soft house clothes, hair looser than I'd ever seen. "You found it," she said, though her eyes lingered longer than they needed to. She stepped aside. "Come in before you change your mind." Her kitchen was warm, the air carrying faint chamomile. She poured tea without asking, like she knew I wouldn't refuse. We sat at her small table, the kind that looked too fragile for elbows, yet I leaned anyway. "I used to drink coffee at night," she said, wrapping her hands around the mug. "Until I realized I wasn't staying awake for the coffee. Just the habit of waiting." "Waiting for what?" I asked. She shrugged. "Noise, maybe. Someone to walk through the door. For the house to feel less She stopped, took a sip, didn't finish. I watched the way steam curled near her glasses, how she blinked as if to clear her eyes. A detail too small to notice, but I couldn't look away. I almost told her how quiet my place was too. How I sometimes left the TV on just for company. Instead, I said, I wait for the bus schedule online. Even when I'm not taking it. Just to see if it's late. Her laugh was quiet, almost unwilling, but it softened her. That's stranger than my tea confession. We stayed like that, letting silence press and release between us. Not heavy, just tuned. I thought about the risk, my best friend, her nephew, who'd call me stupid if he knew. I thought about how she was twice my age, maybe more, and how that truth sat like a weight in my chest. Still, I noticed the way her sleeve brushed mine when she set down her cup. How either of us pulled back. I was married once, she said suddenly, voice steady. Didn't end well. It makes people assume things about me. That I'm lonely. Or desperate. She gave a wry smile. Maybe they're not wrong. I should have said something comforting. Instead, all I managed was, I don't think desperate people make good tea. She looked at me for a long moment, not smiling, not sad, just studying, like she was measuring whether I meant it. I kept folding the tea bag string around my finger, tighter, until it left a faint mark. Her hand reached out, stopped just short, then pressed lightly against mine. Not long. Not dramatic. Just enough. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. After that night with the tea, something shifted. Not loud enough for anyone else to notice, but I carried it in my chest like a pulse I couldn't slow. I started timing my cafe visits around hers without admitting that's what I was doing. She noticed anyway. You're getting predictable, she said once, closing her book a little too quickly. I almost joked back, but her tone wasn't light. She tapped her mug, eyes lowered. That's not always good. I knew what she meant. My best friend had started asking why I was out late so often. I shrugged him off, but the lie stuck in my throat. At her place one evening, I reached for a book she'd left on the counter. My hand brushed a stack of unopened mail, all with her ex-husband's name still printed on the return address. I froze. She noticed. Slid them out of sight without comment. I started. Didn't finish. She only nodded, as if she'd been expecting me to leave. But I didn't. We sat instead, the clock ticking too loud on the wall. She poured me more tea I didn't need. Neither of us drank. Her neighbor knocked once, calling her name through the door, casual, friendly, too close. She waved it off, whispering, She'll think I'm in bed already. But her voice carried tension, like being found out would mean something. I stared at the door even after the footsteps faded. She stared at me. People notice things, she murmured. They always do. I wanted to say let them. Wanted to. But the words wouldn't come. My throat tightened. Instead, I fiddled with the edge of the napkin she tucked under my cup. Fold, crease, unfold. My nerves spilling out in small shapes. Her hand twitched, almost reaching like before, but she pulled it back. You don't know what you want, she said softly, eyes sharp now. Maybe she was right. Or maybe I just hadn't had the courage to say it. Silence stretched. My chest hurt with it. I leaned forward before I even thought it through, close enough to see the faint line near her mouth, the uneven rhythm of her breath. She didn't move away. But she didn't move closer either. Her gaze broke first, drifting to the window where the streetlight bled through. We should, she whispered. Then stopped. The sentence hung unfinished between us. I didn't kiss her. Not quite. Just close enough that the air felt weighted, fragile, one breath from breaking. That's when the hallway light outside flicked on, footsteps passing, a key turning in the neighbor's door. She pulled back, the motion small but final. I sat there, heart racing, hands empty. The moment dissolved into silence. But the heat of almost touch stayed on my skin long after I left. It was late, and we walked because neither of us wanted to say goodbye at her door. The streets were quiet, shop signs dimmed, pavement slick from a drizzle that had already passed. She carried an umbrella closed at her side, not for rain, just something to hold. I kept glancing at her hands, noticing how tightly she gripped the handle, how her knuckles whitened with every step. "You should be out with people your own age," she said suddenly. Not accusing, but flat. Like she'd been holding it in. I stopped. "You mean, not here?" She gave a small laugh, bitter around the edges. "Not here. Not with me." We stood by the bus shelter, the glass fogged from the weather. I shoved my hands into my pockets, staring at the concrete. "You don't sound like you mean that." Her eyes flicked toward me sharp. Then softer. "Maybe I don't. But I should." The bus rolled past, empty, not stopping. The sound filled the silence for too long. She leaned against the shelter, shoulders sagging. "Do you know what it feels like?" she whispered. "To realize you've become someone's mistake in the making?" The words cut sharper than I expected. I wanted to argue, to tell her she wasn't. Instead, I stepped closer, hands still buried in my pockets like that might keep me from doing something reckless. "You're not a mistake," I said. Too fast. Too certain. Her mouth twitched, a flicker of something like disbelief. "Then what am I?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat tightened around too many words. The silence stretched. She looked away first, out at the wet street, at the faint glow of the diner sign across the corner. "I keep telling myself you'll wake up one morning and see it differently. That you'll realize I'm too much of something. Or not enough." Her voice cracked just slightly, then steadied. "And I don't know if I want that or if I'm terrified of it." I felt it then, the weight of her fear, tangled with my own. Not just about her, but about what this meant, how much I wanted it anyway. I shifted close enough now that her sleeve brushed mine. Close enough to hear her uneven breath. "If I told you," I began, then faltered. My chest hurt from holding it back. She turned, eyes meeting mine with a steadiness that made my pulse stumble. "If you told me what?" The question hung there, raw, demanding, tender. I opened my mouth. Closed it. Opened again. The world around us hushed. No cars, no footsteps, just the two of us in that fragile pocket of air. And I thought, this is the moment. But I didn't answer. Not yet. The next week, she wasn't at the cafe. I told myself it didn't matter, that people have lives, routines change. Still, I stayed longer than I should have, coffee cooling in front of me. Every time the door opened, my head lifted. Not her. On the third night, I stopped going. It felt too obvious, too desperate, waiting in her absence. But the emptiness followed me home anyway, the silence heavier, my phone heavier. I drafted a message, "Everything okay?" Deleted it. Typed again, "Should I stop by?" Deleted again. The blinking cursor felt like a hand on my throat. 2 days later, I saw her across the street. Not at the cafe, not waiting. She was walking with someone. A man older than me, maybe close to her age. He carried a grocery bag, laughed at something she said. She didn't laugh back, not fully, but the way she looked at him, it wasn't nothing. I stopped mid-step, half hidden behind a lamppost like a kid. She didn't see me. I didn't call out. The next evening, I found the courage to go to her door. I stood there long enough for the neighbor to peek out her window, long enough for my palms to sweat. I didn't knock. Later that night, I got a message from my friend, her nephew. "Crazy seeing my aunt out with Rob again. Didn't think she'd go back to that." Rob. I let the name sit there, heavy and clumsy. I stared at the screen, at the text half written in reply. Yeah, she deserves better. I didn't send it. I deleted it like all the others. The days blurred. I kept expecting her to appear, to text, to fold the silence into something smaller. But she didn't. At night I replayed our last walk, the bus shelter, her question, "If you told me what?" The unfinished sentence looped in my head, fraying at the edges. I tried to answer her in my mind. Tried to say the words I hadn't then. Sometimes I managed them. Most times I couldn't. When I finally went back to the cafe, her table was empty. Her book wasn't there. Her glasses weren't left behind. Just an abandoned napkin, folded crookedly by someone else. I sat across from it anyway, like the shadow of her might return. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. I pulled out my phone. Typed one word, tomorrow? The cursor blinked, waiting. Then I locked the screen and slipped it back into my pocket. The seat across from me stayed empty. I didn't expect to see her again, not like that. It was late, almost midnight, when I found myself passing by her building, half by accident, half not. The light over her kitchen sink was still on. I hesitated at the gate. I'd walked away too many times already. Tonight I didn't. When she opened the door, she looked surprised but not startled. A cardigan thrown over her shoulders, hair loose, tired in a way I hadn't seen before. She held the door halfway, as if she hadn't decided whether to let me in. "I shouldn't be here," I said. My voice sounded rough, even to me. "No," she answered soft. "You shouldn't." Neither of us moved. Finally, she stepped back, just enough. I walked inside, the air warmer, filled with faint lemon soap. We sat at the small kitchen table, the same one where I'd folded napkins and let silence do the talking. She didn't make tea this time. Maybe she knew it wasn't about that anymore. I leaned forward, elbows on the table, trying to catch my breath. "I saw you the other day," I said. "With him." Her lips pressed together. Not denial, not apology, just a quiet acceptance. "Rob," she said finally. "He comes and goes. That's all." "That's all?" My voice caught more edge than I wanted. She looked down at her hands. "You're young. You don't know what it's like to settle. To choose comfort over risk." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I felt the crack inside me. "I'm not asking for comfort." Her eyes met mine then, steady, searching. "Then what are you asking for?" The question sat heavy between us. I swallowed. "To not feel invisible when I walk into a room." The words tumbled out before I could stop them. "To not wonder if I matter more than just a routine." Her face softened, a flicker of pain in her eyes. She reached for her mug, empty, then set it back down. Her fingers brushed the table, restless. "I've been afraid," she admitted. "Afraid of what people would think. Afraid you'd regret it. Afraid I'd regret it. And sometimes, afraid of how much I wanted not to care." The honesty landed like a stone. My chest felt tight, but lighter too. For a long moment, we just sat there. The kitchen clock ticked. A car passed outside. I thought about all the unfinished sentences between us, how many we'd left hanging. I reached across the table, my hand stopping just short of hers. Not a demand. Just an offering. She hesitated. Then, slowly, she set her hand over mine. Her skin was warm, steady. Neither of us smiled big. Neither of us said more than we needed. Just a small exhale from her, almost a whisper. "Okay." And for the first time, that word felt like enough. Time didn't fix everything, but it softened the edges. Weeks turned into something steadier. Not a rush, not a secret flame burning too fast, just evenings that stretched a little longer, mornings that started with more than silence. We didn't meet at the cafe much anymore. Instead, it was her kitchen. Or the bench down the block, the one under the crooked street lamp that always buzzed at 8:47 a.m. when the power line shifted. I still ordered black coffee, 1 sugar. She still teased me for never learning to cook anything beyond eggs. But there was tea, always, sitting between us on the table, steam curling into the quiet. She didn't bring up Rob again. I didn't ask. Some things faded without needing to be explained. Others stayed. Like the way she set 2 mugs out without thinking, like the way I folded napkins absent-mindedly into squares. The fear never fully left her eyes. But neither did the steadiness. we carried both, side by side. One night, we walked again, the same route as before, past the bus shelter. The glass was still fogged, like the city itself remembered us. She stopped there, touching the frame lightly with her hand. "I don't think about mistakes anymore," she said. "No dramatics, no wait. Just a fact." I nodded. Didn't need to answer. The truth was in the way we kept walking, not away, but together. At her place, we didn't always talk. Sometimes we just let the clock tick, let the silence stretch without fear. I'd glance at her hands wrapped around the mug, the same way I did the first night. Only now, it felt like something earned, not borrowed. Loneliness hadn't disappeared. But it was different now, shared softer, like a room with the lights left on. Months later, sitting at that same bench, she laughed at something I said, really laughed, the kind that carried past the street. I didn't even remember the joke. What stayed with me was the sound, how it echoed against the early morning air, how it felt like a reply to every unfinished sentence we'd left behind. I caught myself smiling without realizing, the kind that wasn't big or forced, just quiet, like hers. And in that moment I knew, nothing needed to be declared. It was already here. Something only we would understand.